The thing about humans is we're blank slates, like literally blank slates. I mean, most people would think that that's the case, when you're born, but beyond just being a baby and not knowing anything, that human being is as blank as a blank slate. Meaning, that child is not born with a language, with a taste bud preference, with fashion taste, none of that. That child is a blank slate. So what's painted upon them comes from their environment. Their parents, of course, is the number one artist that decides where that child lives, what the child is exposed to, what friends they're going to be around. That it's largely dependent on the schools that they're in, and that's kind of like the the foundational core of that person when you talk about nature versus nurture. So we come and we show up with certain things that evolves over time as a human, but there are also things that's being painted upon us with nurture. But the best way a person can lose their real legacy in this life is by being or attaching themselves to something within that environment that is not really the core of who they are. And that happens way more times than we tend to recognize. Friends can influence us, music can influence us, trauma can influence us. There are certain things that places an influence upon us that takes us down a road of where we really aren't supposed to go. You see, peer pressure is probably the largest source of pressure that we can get. Some people would say financial pressure or fear of your parents and fear of religion, your spirituality, stuff like that. But psychologists have shown in theory and studies that children are more adaptive to their social environment than anything else. So you can have parents that speak, say, Spanish or like for me, I'm from the Caribbean, so Caribbean accent. All my kids were born stateside, and I can speak straight in my dialect, and they understand it to a T, but they don't speak it. And if they attempt to speak it, they sound crazy. So they went through school adapting to the dialects or the accents or the linguistics or speech structure of their friends, and that's just how it goes. So they attach themselves to that, and that can become more of a stronghold on them than we tend to recognize. So now look at yourself. There's strongholds that you may have because of social pressure. Become adults, that peer pressure is still there. We still have peers. They're just older peers. They're now in their 30s, 40s, 50s, 60s, 70s. They're still our peers, and we adapt to that of our peers. And many times what we're adapting to is survival mechanism. It's coping and surviving through life and not really tapping into who we really, really are. It's so funny because the path I was on as a kid showed one side of me. And as I matured and became an adult, English is my favorite subject in school. I always aced it. I was king spelling bee, and just I can ace an English exam with being half asleep. And English and history. Back then we had penmanship. But the bottom of my subject matter was science. I wasn't a real big fan of science. But as an adult, I became open to all subjects, right? So I can be someone who's visiting national parks and museums and get stuck on exhibits for a long time. And the people that knew me from before, the erratic, gregarious, maybe very sociable, fashionable, sometimes dysfunctional kid that I was, they would look at that and be like, who is he? One of the things that I always say to people is, I don't think people change. I think they can change lanes, like a vehicle. The car stays the same, but what direction the car is going in and what lane it's traveling in is what it's typically can change. So me as a kid, as maybe a rebellious teen or just pushing back against the institution, and the institution as kids is really your parents, so your family life and the hierarchy of your uncles, aunts, grandparents, and me pushing back on that is kind of like the same today, but I'm pushing back on something else. So I'm pushing back on what society or the institution says is the norm, which the institution says save 10% of your income, find this job, go down this road for 40 years, get your Social Security, retire, and really not hit the higher levels of what you should hit in life. And that pressure, that social pressure to not stick out, we wear the clothing of our community, we adapt to the geography of where we are. So if the culture of where we are is people that are maybe outdoorsmen, and we may dress that way, we may have the pickup trucks and the hunting, we do these things, right? But here's the thing. That's the environment that we're around. There's still something inside of you that may steer you just a little bit away from what people expect you to be based on the environment that you're in. And that environment that you're in often spits out occupants of that society that is not of that society. Well, I'm sorry, that's of the society, but not of the society, if that makes sense. It spits out people of that society to the naked eye, but really they had something else in them that should have been nurtured or pursued. But because of social pressure, it's not pursued. So the easiest way for you to fail what your real legacy is in life is to go against what you know you should be on the inside. I got a friend, next door neighbor, and the community or the neighborhood I grew up in was a very tough community. I mean, I'll put it up against any community in the world when it comes to the type of people that was spit out from that community and the type of things you got to endure. I mean, literally, you're walking, if you're forced to walk to and from school or to the grocery store or whatever, you're walking through gangsters all day long. And how do you adapt and how do you survive? You got some people that they got eat up by it. They fear it. They assimilate to it. Sometimes you may have some level of respect for some reason, and you can avert becoming victimized by it. But my next door neighbor was very quiet, and she hardly interacted with the community at large. We all were good friends with her when we did have the chance to interact with her. And her son wound up being in the Olympics as an Olympic fencer. Now, that is not something you're going to see coming from our community. Like a fencer, like, the guys, the swords, yeah. Like Zorro. Maybe I'm dating myself again. But that is not what you would typically see from our community. But he was groomed and allowed to foster that talent, and wound up in the Olympics. That's not what you typically see. So what happens to us is we get very surprised when we see someone break out of the community, what we think is a breakout, and do something outside of what the community said you should do. So I'm asking you, are you forsaking your legacy because you're doing what the community has asked you to do? Are you going down a road in the vehicle, in the lane that you're not supposed to be on, in, or going towards? You know, it's amazing how many rappers we have, aspiring rappers, aspiring athletes from our community. And, you know, I would often tell my kids, you don't want to be chasing everyone chasing the same dime, because that's the popular thing, right? So you become in your mind wanting to be the next great basketball player because that's what everyone was pursuing. And if everyone's pursuing that and you were able to succeed at it, then you look like this great phenomenon, right? You got this level of maybe respect or notoriety because you were able to do this thing that so many people were trying to pursue. But the people who make it are the people who were bred for it. It's not really necessarily that they're making it because of what's happening in the environment. It's already in them. The legacy's perhaps planted in them. And what you don't want is to enter into a room that you're not prepared for, you're not supposed to be in, but you're in the room. You're not going to stay there. You're not going to stay in that room. You're going to wind up fumbling your way out of that room. So if you're not looking in yourself to say, well, for me, what should I be pursuing? Should I pursue the thing that's in me? Because there's no competition to your purpose. Everyone's purpose has no competition. There's no one else that's competing with you specifically for your purpose. I've managed to achieve some high levels of success in business, in many things that I've decided to pursue. And when you look around, it's because I was in the lane by myself. I was actually answering and going down the road that belonged to me, despite of what my community said, because I would get criticisms for some of the things I was doing where people would be like, why are you doing that? That don't seem right. It doesn't seem right, but it is right because it's something that is in you that you should be pursuing. So what I'm saying to you is don't forego your legacy and having a hard time chasing something or someone that is not you. You want to go with what belongs to you and your purpose, and you will break out and shine, and people will look at you as if you're a phenomenon. One of my favorite books, The Outliers, written by Malcolm Gladwell, talks about putting in 10,000 hours in your craft and exceeding and being very successful at something because you've given your 10,000 hours. A person will not successfully give those 10,000 hours, because that's a lot of hours, if it's not something that's burning within them already. They're going to try, and they're going to be frustrated. They're going to start businesses that they really don't love, and when tough days show up, they're going to quit. They're going to fold. They're not going to handle it properly. And then they're going to blame all the external factors instead of the car being in the wrong lane. That's what you don't want. You want to be the tip of the sword in your craft, but the craft or the thing that you pursue has to also align with what God has purposed you to do. So That's my message for today. As always, the man who fails is the man who tries. I'll see you next time.